Hello, everyone. It's Dr. Nyambura here, live on Howie as promised. Is anyone there yet? I am right on time, even though, as usual, I didn't realize that with the British summertime, GMT is 1 hour ahead. But there you go. I'm here now. If you're there, could you let me know that you can hear me okay? I'll just give it a few minutes. Good, I see a couple of people already. Can you hear me okay? Hi, Amondi. Thank you. Hi, Elsie. Sound okay? Picture okay? Fabulous. Okay. Great. I'm sure people will keep joining in, and the ones who can't make it can catch it. Last time they put it up on my page, which was wonderful. Hi, Faith, you made it. Wonderful. I managed to do it all by myself this time. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm going to get started right away because there's a fair amount to cover, and I really don't want to spend an hour and more like I did the last time. I'm just going to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Nyambura. I am a medical doctor. I'm based in the United Kingdom, and I run a medical weight loss clinic here. I'm absolutely passionate about lifestyle medicine, and I'm fully aware that the lifestyle diseases that we currently have lifestyle solutions. Today, I am really thankful to be on Howie. I just wanted to give a really big thanks to Faith Nyango and Ruth Masharia for all your support. Thank you for having me on this incredible group. Hi, Florence. Fantastic to see you. Hi, Pete. You guys have a fantastic platform here, and I am really honored to be a member of this group. Hi, Ruby. How are you? So let me tell you what I'll talk about today, and then we can get started. So I want to hopefully convince you that fat is actually not as bad as you think it is, and that in fact fat is one of the things that can actually help you lose weight. So I've divided this talk into 4 parts just to give me some structure. So I'm going to start with why do we fear fat, where that all came from, and then we'll talk about saturated fats versus unsaturated fats, and I'll just try and clear that up. And then we'll move on to why fat doesn't make you fat, and in fact what it is that makes you fat. And then to finish up, we'll talk about the best choices of fats and oils that you should use. And I hope that's comprehensive enough for one session. I have to give a disclaimer. I'm absolutely delighted to give generic advice on the internet. You guys know that. I'm always giving my opinion, but in terms of medical advice, I am not able to do that from a legal perspective. I think you can send me your questions, but you really have to be under my care and my direction as a physician for me to legally give you medical advice. So that's out of the way. So let's start talking about, we have about 19 people, which is okay. I think people can join in a bit later on. So let's talk about why we fear fat. Where has this all come from? And I'm not so sure whether we realize, I'm based in the United Kingdom, many of you are based in the United States, and these are the countries, particularly the United States, in which dietary guidelines or food guidelines originated. And in fact, the United States started this in 1977 when they came out with guidelines and they told the population that they should not be eating more than 30% of their total calories in fat, and particularly no more than 10% of their calories should come from saturated fat. So there was that sort of those two numbers, so no more than 30% of total fat and no more than 10% of saturated fat, and then those were the dietary guidelines in the United States. A few years later, in 1983, the United Kingdom adopted those guidelines, and that's been the case ever since. But where did this actually start? And it's a very interesting story. It makes for a Hollywood blockbuster, actually, but I'll keep it short. There was concern in the 50s that lots of men were dying suddenly from heart attacks, and in fact, the president at the time, President Eisenhower, suffered a heart attack, and therefore commissioned a whole bunch of scientists and researchers to go away and figure out what it is that was causing this to happen. Actually, when you look back on the rates of heart disease at the time, they were grossly overrepresented by the people who were involved in it, and I'm not really sure why. Nevertheless, people were dying of heart attacks, and what happened is when you die, you get an autopsy, and when they did the post-mortems, they noticed that within the lining of the arteries, which are the major blood vessels in the heart, they noted fatty streaks, and therefore they sought out to try and figure out whether fat is actually causing that fat to accumulate there. And that was the theory, that dietary fat was directly related to heart disease. Now, here's where it gets interesting. As the scientists in the 1950s looked into whether indeed fat was a problem, they started off with cholesterol. So the theory was that, okay, the cholesterol in the diets of these Americans was directly related to high cholesterol in the blood, which was directly related to the heart attacks and the heart disease that they were suffering. So 8 years into their research, 9 years in, they were unable to find a relationship between cholesterol in the food and cholesterol in the blood. So then they thought, okay, let's now look at saturated fat. And this is where it gets quite interesting. Cholesterol is only found in animal foods. Cholesterol is not found in plant foods. Don't confuse cholesterol with the sterols that you can find in some margarines. Those margarines that lower cholesterol. That's a totally different thing. Cholesterol, the molecule cholesterol, is only found in animal foods. So they had been feeding people these foods for years, and they could not find a connection between cholesterol in the food and cholesterol in the blood. And despite this, they still turned their attention to saturated fat in animal foods, which is crazy. But this is sometimes what happens when scientists have a theory, and they will do anything they can to make sure that their findings fit with their theory, rightly or wrongly. In this case, wrongly. Unfortunately, the long and short of it is there has never been any good quality evidence that cholesterol in the diet causes heart disease. There has never been any good quality evidence that saturated fat in the diet causes heart disease. There has also never been any good quality evidence to show that a high cholesterol means that someone is at risk of getting heart disease. In fact, quite recently, we're beginning to discover that high cholesterol levels are actually associated with longevity, longer life, and not heart disease. So that is the first thing I want to tell you. The fear of fat started in the 70s when scientists decided to blame cholesterol and by extension blame saturated fat for the fatty streaks that they saw in the arteries of these men who had died from heart attacks. That's where it all started. And I'll have you know that a lot of work was done around this to prove this theory. Hundreds of thousands of US dollars went into this. And when they were not able to point the blame on cholesterol, they went for saturated fat, and the rest is history. The dietary guidelines came out, and we were told in no uncertain terms that we should not eat more than 30% of our total calories in total fat and not more than 10% in saturated fat. That's where that came from. So let me talk about this idea of clogging arteries, because it's, hi Ken, hi Beatrice, hi Aquila, thanks for joining me. This idea of clogging arteries is really quite interesting, because I think people, you can imagine if you pour fat down the drain and then the drain blocks and clogs and gets clogged, and people tend to think that that is what happens inside the heart, and that's not the case at all. The reason cholesterol is found in those arteries is because there has been an injury to the artery wall, and you can imagine it's like scratching yourself or scratching your skin. That's an injury. And then what will happen is a scar will form. Well, something similar happens in the lining of the arteries. The first thing that happens is an injury. And then to repair that injury comes the cholesterol. So cholesterol, amongst its many roles, its major role is for repair. So it goes there to repair that injury on the vessel walls. And that is why they found cholesterol inside the arteries. It didn't cause the blockage. It was trying to repair the injury. You know, it's crazy to blame cholesterol. We know that now. It's kind of like going to the scene of a crime and blaming the policeman for causing the crime. It's crazy. You know, cholesterol has never been implicated in heart disease. That's been disproven trial after trial. And the reason cholesterol is found is because it's there to repair, it's there to heal. And that's the end of that story. So let me talk about saturated fat versus unsaturated fat. And obviously, if you have any questions, please keep them coming, and I'll try and answer them as I go along. So around the time when the concerns around cholesterol and saturated fat started, people were also putting on weight. And therefore, what people realized is actually fat has double the number of calories as carbohydrates and protein, and therefore if we cut down on fat, we'll cut down on our calories, and therefore people will lose weight. So they thought, oh brilliant, we'll kill two birds with one stone, we'll lower the total fat, particularly the saturated fat. People will then lose weight because they're eating less calories, and people will stop having heart disease because we've taken out the problem. But if you've been following my work for a while, you'll know that actually the exact opposite happened. As soon as the dietary guidelines were introduced, we started getting fatter and we started getting sicker. We started getting more and more heart disease. It is true that less people are dying from heart disease now, but that's only because of the introduction of medicines and therapies to prolong life. But the incidence of heart disease and the incidence of obesity has risen just as the dietary guidelines were introduced. Okay, Ruth, I will definitely answer the question about triglycerides and HDL as soon as I get a chance. Thank you for that. So let's talk about saturated fat versus unsaturated fat, because there is this whole school of thought that red meat is full of saturated fat, and fish and plant sources are good sources of unsaturated fat. Okay, so let me just put this simply. That doesn't make any sense. All foods that contain fat, contain all three fats. So all foods that contain fat contain saturated fat, unsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fats. Okay, what is all this? So fat is simply chains of carbon molecules with hydrogens attached to them. So that's what fats is. So a saturated fat has all the hydrogens that are required, and all the hydrogen bonds are there. For monounsaturated fats, you have one pair of hydrogen bonds missing, and for polyunsaturated fats, you have more than one pair of hydrogen bonds missing. So the latter two, the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, are more unstable, and the saturated are more stable. So in fact, it's probably more appropriate to call them stable versus unstable fats, as opposed to saturated versus unsaturated. Okay, so that is the distinction between the three fats. All foods, no exceptions, contain all three fats, just in different proportions. Hello, Joyce. How are you? So the interesting thing is that all foods contain all three fats. And I said in different proportions. What is interesting is dairy, for instance, contains more saturated fat than unsaturated fat. And that is why we are being told to go for low-fat dairy products. But here is something interesting, and I'm going to send a link for the USDA food database. And this is a free online database. You can go and type in any food, and it will tell you all the things that food contains. And this is what we know. Red meat, eggs, lard, which is fat from pigs, have more unsaturated fat than saturated fat. So the Kenyans among us, the nyama choma that you're being told to not eat, that contains more unsaturated fat than it contains saturated fat. Same thing with eggs, same thing with lard. The public health officials want us to eat more fish. But did you know that mackerel, for instance, contains more saturated fat than a piece of steak? It does. This is all free information available. So mackerel, for instance, contains twice as much total fat as a steak, a sirloin steak, and 1.5 times more saturated fat than that steak. So in the one hand, we're being told, yes, eat more fish, but they don't realize that actually the oily fish that they want us to eat has more saturated fat, but they're also telling us to eat less saturated. So you can see how confusing this charade becomes. Did you know that olive oil has got 7 times more saturated fat than a pork chop? 1 tablespoon of olive oil has more saturated fat than the entire pork chop. But we're being encouraged to go on Mediterranean diets and eat oily fish and eat olive oil. So there is something wrong with this whole saturated versus unsaturated. Either people don't know what they're talking about, and in my opinion, for the public health officials, if you're teaching us how to be healthy, it's your responsibility to know what these foods actually contain. Coconut oil is 99% saturated fat, and that's now the new trend. Everybody wants to cook with coconut oil because it is apparently healthier. So this is the long and short of it. All foods contain all fats. Saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, which are usually your omega-9s, and polyunsaturated fats, which are usually your omega-6s and omega-3s. The saturated fat that they should be pointing a finger on is not the natural sources of saturated fat. It's not the fish, it's not the red meat, it's not the eggs, it's not the lard, nor the ghee, none of those things. Natural saturated fat has been in the human food chain for years, millennia. It did not suddenly become dangerous. The fat that is dangerous is a saturated fat that comes not from nature, but comes from a factory. And these are the trans fats. These are the fats, all a trans fat is an unsaturated fat that has been forced to have an extra hydrogen molecule so that it can become solid. That's all that is, okay? And these trans fats are found in margarines. They're found in processed food, donuts, pizzas, meat products, crisps, chocolates, biscuits, cakes, pastries. It is criminal to lump all these nasty processed foods and the saturated fat they contain in the same line as all the natural saturated fat. Those are two very different things. The natural saturated fat is healthy and it has always been. We need to be focusing on the processed foods that contain all these other artificial fats. There is where the problem is, not with your sirloin steak or the rim of fat around your pork chop or your very fatty, oily fish. That is good. And I'll tell you in a little while that actually that is now known to be protective from heart disease. So saturated fat is found in extremely high proportions in human breast milk. If it was so bad for us, how on earth is that possible? That the first milk that a new human being receives is full to chocker full of saturated fat. I mean, if it was that dangerous, how is that even possible from an adaptation point of view? It's not. There's nothing wrong with healthy, natural saturated fat. Nature does not make bad fats. Factories make bad fats. There is your distinction. The only way to remove the dangerous saturated fat from the diet is to stop eating processed food. It's as simple as that. We need to go back to a real food diet and eat the foods that our grandparents ate. So I read something quite interesting the other day that saturated fat, natural saturated fat, like for instance, if you were to cook chips in tallow, beef tallow, or in lard or in ghee, the saturated fat prevents the fat cells from increasing in size too much. So they actually protect the fat cell from getting fatter and fatter. And in doing so, it protects the body from the influence of eating fat. So it's actually an incredibly protective mechanism. If you then cook the same chips in, for instance, sunflower oil, the cells just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually the fat cell reaches a critical point at which it cannot accept any more energy. And that is when all the fat has to come right out and it ends up swimming around the body. This fat that is not in the cell is not recognized by the body as own. It's recognized as foreign, and therefore the body starts to attack it. This is the fat that ends up in and around the organs in your abdomen. And this is when I read about this, I realized that actually we've been not only wrong to demonize saturated fat, but we've been dangerously wrong that in demonizing saturated fat, we then allowed and encouraged people to have all these other processed seed oils that are actually causing the greatest problem. Okay. Hi, Christine. Hi, Patience. So let's move on to the third thing, and then I will answer all the questions. So the third thing is, if fat doesn't make you fat, what makes you fat? So what I've described earlier is that natural fat from animals and fat from plants like olive oil and coconut oil, natural and avocados, that is healthy and it's actually protective. The fat that you eat does not go from your mouth to your stomach, to your butt, or to your hips. It doesn't work like that. I appreciate that it's quite a sexy thought that fat makes you fat. And in fact, I think that this is why they keep propagating it, because it's actually quite an easy message. Eat fat, get fat. But you know what? It doesn't work like that. The body doesn't work like that. And here is why. So we eat 3 types of foods. Scientists like to call them macronutrients. So we eat protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Now, protein is present in every single food group except pure fats and sugar. Protein is present everywhere else. And that way, this is why the percentage of protein we eat doesn't really change that much. It's stuck at about 15%. The other food we eat is fat, and we've been told to eat no more than 30%. So that's already a total of 45%. And then the other food group is carbohydrates, and we've been told to eat to base our meals on starches. Base your meals on starchy food. So that makes 55%. So we've been told to eat 55% more starch than we ate before. So in other words, when they told us to reduce the amount of fat in our diet down to 30%, inadvertently, because we have to replace it with something, we were encouraged to eat more starch. Now, this is where it gets interesting. When you eat carbohydrates, particularly the highly refined carbohydrates and sugars, these are the ones that affect the fat storing hormones, insulin, more than any other food group. So what I mean by this is that when you eat carbohydrates when you eat any carbohydrate, the hormone insulin is released, and what that does is that it takes any extra glucose into the cell, any extra glucose that's not required by the body. So what happens once the glucose stores in the cell are full? Insulin then says, okay, the glucose cells are full, you're still eating a lot of glucose, so let me convert all that extra glucose into fat. So that is why insulin is a fat storing hormone. It will take the glucose in the diet, it will shunt it into the cells, but when that reaches its maximum capacity, which it always does, it will then convert that into fat. What effect does insulin have on protein? Not much. It's a moderate effect. So when you eat protein, yes, insulin is released, but not nearly to the extent as to when you're eating carbohydrates. And what about fat? Insulin has very, very little effect on pure fat. If you ate 2,000 calories of pure fat, you would not get fat. Why? Because it does not stimulate the release of insulin, and without insulin, it is not possible to put on weight. And this is evidenced by the type 1 diabetics. These are people who are born without a functioning pancreas. They don't produce insulin, and 100% of them are thin. They're underweight, in spite of the calories that they eat. And this is the point. The point I'm making is that getting fat has nothing to do with calories. It has everything to do with how your body handles the calories that it receives. I have just explained that if you eat carbohydrates, and particularly to excess, they will all get converted into fat. If you eat protein to excess, some will get converted and stored as glucose and amino acids, and the rest will get to be wasted. And if you eat too much fat, you will just utilize that fat, store a little bit, and excrete what you don't need. But to get fat, you need insulin. And what stimulates insulin more than anything? Carbohydrates. These are the foods that they have told us to replace in place of saturated fat in particular. They want us to eat more starches and therefore more sugars. Why do I say more sugars? Because all carbohydrates that can be digested by the human body break down into glucose. So it doesn't matter, your body doesn't care whether that glucose came from a potato or table sugar. It is still going to be broken down into glucose in your body, irrespective of its origin, which means that it's still going to have the same effect on insulin. So the processed carbohydrates that they have us eating are actually what is making us fat. That is it. And here is where it gets even more interesting. When we cook these processed carbohydrates, and what I'm talking about is donuts, pastries, mandazis, samosas, chapatis, we cook them in all the wrong type of fats. So we're cooking them in, for instance, canola oil, sunflower oil, and those kind of things, rapeseed oil. These are oils that are very, very high in omega-6. And omega-6 is an essential fatty acid, just like omega-3, but it is dangerous in high proportions. But if we process our fats from seed oils, from seeds, for instance, if you process sunflower seeds to make sunflower oil, you seriously concentrate the amount of omega-6 in that food. And therefore, just the way your body cannot process too much sugar, your body cannot process all that omega-6. And that is why it is not advisable to have that much vegetable oil because of the proportion of omega-6 to omega-3. You know, in an ideal world, it would be 1:1 or 2:1. But in our current diets, we're eating 6 times more omega-6 than we are omega-3. So this is why omega-6 starts to become pro-inflammatory, causing inflammation, and omega-3 is lagging behind, and that is what is protective. So I will recap because I know that may have seemed confusing. We are overdoing the industrial processed seed oils. What the manufacturers have done is that they've taken all these healthy seeds like sunflower seeds, they've squeezed them and put them through all these processes to make a refined oil. And in doing so, they have concentrated the amount of omega-6 in our diets. And these are the oils that we use to deep fry our refined carbohydrates that we have been encouraged to eat. No wonder we have an obesity crisis. No wonder. So it's a double blow. On the one hand, because of telling us to eat much less fat in our diet, we are eating much more starch because we have to replace something with something. So we're eating much more starch, and the starch that they're encouraging us to eat is all being converted to glucose. So in other words, we're eating much more sugar. To make matters worse, we are cooking those foods in quantities of omega-6 oils that the human body has never been designed to handle. So we have two dangerous states: very high omega-6 levels, which is causing all sorts of havoc in the body, and very high sugar levels. Below the neck, all carbohydrates that can be digested by a human being get converted into simple sugars, glucose and fructose. There are no exceptions, no exceptions. Someone might be asking, well, what about fiber? Fiber is a carbohydrate. Yes, fiber is a carbohydrate. And in fact, indigestible fiber, for instance, in greens, like collard greens, kale, sukuma wiki, that is insoluble fiber. What that means is that the human body cannot digest that fiber. So why do we eat it? Why would we eat something that our human bodies cannot digest? Well, there's something called the gut microbiome. In your gut, right now, you have about 100 trillion bacteria in your gut. And these bacteria work with your body, with your human cells, to give you optimal health. And what do those bacteria thrive on? They thrive on insoluble fiber. That is why you should be eating insoluble fiber, okay? Insoluble fiber has no effect on insulin, and by and large, is the reason we eat it is to help your gut bacteria stay healthy and grow, and this is what keeps you well. But that's a whole other topic for another day. So fiber, yes, fiber is a carbohydrate, but it cannot be digested by the human body. It's being digested by the bacterial cells. All the other carbohydrates that they're having us eating, and in particular, I don't know whether you've had a look at the Eat Well plate that the National Health Service has come out with. I mean, I've never seen anything quite so ridiculous. So they have, it's pictorial now, and they say, so now you need to have a third of your plate, a third of your plate should be starches. And in that picture, right in the corner, they have potatoes, and then they have a very large baguette, and then they have bagels and bread and pasta and spaghetti. What is this? You know, these are not healthy, natural carbohydrates. This is processed food. This is processed crap that's making people sick. It drives me mad that they could leave the potatoes right up there in the corner. You know, where are the rest? Where are the sweet potatoes? You know, where are the turnips? Where are all the other vegetables and starches that grow below the ground that human beings have evolved and adapted eating? We have not adapted to eat pasta and spaghetti and bread and bagels that they're putting on that picture. Those things are very high in refined flour. And what happens is that they all get converted into glucose. Full stop. In other words, they're telling you that a third of your plate should be glucose. They might as well just say it like that, because that's what happens in your body. And that's what I care about. So last time I talked about the calorie theory, and I'm not going to talk that much about it, because by now you must understand that calories are not all equal. I have just explained that the calories in refined sugars and flours are far more fattening and far more dangerous than the calories in fat, because of the hormone insulin and how the body utilizes these calories. So the dietary guidelines have told us, have more carbs, have more processed seed oils, because they don't want you to be having natural fat, and inadvertently have more salt and more sugar, so that this processed food can actually taste of something. Because remember, when you take natural fat out of food, it tastes awful, doesn't it? So you have to replace it with something. So the constituents of processed food are as follows: refined flour, sugar, salt, and vegetable oils. If you go into your supermarket, those 4 ingredients dominate all the middle section of all the aisles. The only place you're not going to find those 4 ingredients is your fresh food and dairy section. All processed foods have the same formula: a little bit of refined flour, sugar, salt, and vegetable oils. And this is what I call a metabolic bomb, because not only is sugar so dangerous and the #1 cause of the metabolic disease crisis and obesity we have now, but in combination with the vegetable oils, it's a double tragedy. It's really a double tragedy. But that is what we're being told to eat. So there you go. Sugar in excess gets converted to fat. So when I tell people not to drink full fat Coca-Cola, and they tell me, oh, it's not full fat, it's full sugar, I say to them, I know, because sugar in that amount, 13 teaspoons of sugar in a Coca-Cola, that gets converted into fat. There's no chance of your body utilizing that amount of sugar in one sitting. So what fats should we eat? And we need to wrap it up now. So the best fats to eat, now that you understand that there has never been any evidence implicating natural fats in heart disease or obesity for that matter, the fats you should be eating are those fats, the natural fats in meat, fish, lard, butter, eggs, olives, olive oil, coconut. These are the foods that have existed for centuries, and they're healthful and they're good for you. Do not fall for anything that calls itself a fat out with what is natural, including seeds. Sunflower seeds, for instance, have the highest amount of natural vitamin E. And eat seeds. That's how to get your vitamin E. There's nothing wrong with that, but not when it's processed into a vegetable oil. Remember what I said last time, the toxicity lies in the processing. There is nothing wrong with a sugar cane if you're chewing on it. But if you process it into sugar, then we have a problem. There is nothing wrong with sunflower seeds. But if you process them into a vegetable oil, now you have a problem. Just quit messing with nature and you'll be okay. So the trans fats, these margarines, Blue Band, Flora, all that nonsense, I can't believe it's not butter, Benecol, all that stuff comes from a factory. It is not good for you. In fact, there is new research showing that these plant sterols are actually, even though they lower cholesterol, which is neither here nor there, they actually can cause heart disease. I said earlier, if those of you who weren't here, cholesterol has never been linked to anything. It's never been linked to any disease, I mean. So why are you lowering cholesterol if the outcome is uncertain? Why are they still telling us to lower our cholesterol if our cholesterol has never been proven to cause any harm? Why are we still doing it? Why are we putting people on statins? What for? The toxicity lies in the processing. If I could just start with a question that follows on from here. Someone asked me whether it's safe to cook in olive oil. And the answer is yes, it absolutely is. Olive oil is very high in the monounsaturated fat, so it's a more stable fat, and therefore it tolerates cooking very, very well. There's a fear around cooking with olive oil that it forms carcinogenic compounds. It just doesn't happen that way. You need to heat the oil for hours and hours and hours and hours over very, very high heats to get those compounds being developed and them actually causing harm. And remember, olive oil is very, very high in antioxidants, which counteracts any oxidation that could occur during the cooking process. So olive oil is safe. Extra virgin olive oil is the best. That is the best. Get the best. If you're going to have it, have the best. Coconut oil as well is fantastic to cook in. Butter. A lot of people don't like the fact that butter browns too quickly, but you can mix it in olive oil or coconut oil if you can handle the taste and cook that way. Then you have seriously increased the smoking point and you don't have to worry about that. We need to be going back to the natural fruit oils and the least processed oils we can find and move away from the industrial oils. So olive oil is a very, very stable oil. The oils you're going to avoid are the canola oil from rapeseed, corn oil, hemp seed oil, sunflower oil, soybean oil, peanut oil. Sometimes they call it groundnut oil. All these oils that have been produced in mega factories, yeah? So I'm not talking about, for instance, a rapeseed oil that's been locally produced and cold pressed. It has not gone through any extra processing. That is okay. What I'm talking about is the cheap as chips oils that you find in the supermarket that cost $1 or less, or £1 or less. Those are the oils we need to avoid because there's nothing wrong with omega-6 that they contain. It's just in too high quantities. It's the same issue that I have, for instance, with the smoothies and juicing. I don't have an issue with apples. I have an issue with apple juice. because our bodies were never designed to accept the delivery of that much sugar in one go. And the same applies with these oils. The same thing applies. The toxicity is in the processing. So those are the oils that I want you to eat. Those are the oils that I advise. I do not advise margarine. I do not advise anything that could potentially lower your cholesterol. There's no need to lower your cholesterol. Faith is asking, what about vegetable oils? Those are the vegetable oils, the canola oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, soybean oil. All these highly processed oils need to disappear from your diet if you want to lose weight. That's what needs to happen. The reason I titled this talk, Fat Can Make You Thin, is because if you stop eating processed food, if you take out all the refined flour, all the sugar, and go back to eating natural food and natural fat, you will lose weight. Whether or not you cut out the natural starches, you will still lose weight. If you're obese and overweight and you're desperate to lose weight, what I always say to people is the very first thing you need to be cutting out is all the extra carbohydrates in your diet. Because I can guarantee you that the vast majority of them are highly processed, based on flour, and they're being cooked in these omega-6 oils. Do that for 2 weeks and come back to me if you have not lost a significant amount of weight. So Valentine says, the olive oil getting heated so fast and burns. Yes, so this is the thing. I don't know whether you're aware there's a huge olive oil black market. There's olive oil and there's olive oil. You need to be buying the right olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, the very expensive one that comes, well, very expensive in terms of relatively. So the one I buy costs about 4 or 5 pounds per liter compared to an equivalent sunflower oil. You need to be buying the purest forms of olive oil. Olive oil is also a natural product. And remember, natural products contain water. Sometimes what you might be seeing to be smoke is actually steam. So I'm not so sure what your experience is. One of the things I advise is, if you're still concerned about the smoking of the olive oil, add in a bit of butter or a bit of coconut oil. These are more stable oils, and that will reduce the smoking significantly. But ultimately, that olive oil is still safe for you to eat. Okay, there was another question here. Faith, I hope I answered your question about olive oil. So you're going to be using extra virgin olive oil for cooking, along with coconut oil and butter, tallow, ghee, goose fat. Just go crazy. As long as it's natural, go for it. Someone is asking about aloe vera. Aloe vera is, I think that's out with the remit of this talk. I'm not sure what the question is suggesting. What's the story behind olive oil? I think I've just described that for you, Valentine. Olive oil is pretty safe. It's got a bad reputation, and there's a lot of black market olive oil out there. Just go for the very best. Pay a few extra bucks and get the best stuff. You only need a little bit of it anyway when you're cooking, and when you're not cooking, when you're using it as a dressing, you can use it liberally. And you can have as much healthy fat as you like, provided, and this is the key, provided you're not eating all the refined carbohydrates. If you're doing both, you're going to put on weight faster than anything. Okay, so Ruth earlier asked if I could talk about HDL, triglycerides, LDL, and total cholesterol, and what is used to determine if someone needs to be on statins. Now, this is a fairly controversial topic, but here is my take on statins. Statins are used for two things. One, to lower cholesterol, and one, to reduce inflammation. Now, if you're going to be using a statin to lower cholesterol, that, in my opinion, is ridiculous, because I have described that cholesterol in food has no impact on your cholesterol in your blood. The cholesterol in your blood, whether it's high or very high, does not cause heart disease. It doesn't. So I cannot see why you would want to lower your cholesterol for that reason. So if you have a cholesterol done by your doctor and it comes back as 7 or 8 or whatever, what I would say to you is, well, that is your cholesterol. Are you eating processed food? Can you clean up your diet in any other way? You don't want to be actively lowering your cholesterol. You need to be getting rid of all the extra flours and sugars that get turned into the dangerous fat. That's the fat you need to worry about. The second reason people take statins is because it's an anti-inflammatory. And this was found as a by the way, when they had already developed the drug to lower cholesterol. And now they're really marketing it as an anti-inflammatory. Let me tell you what, in your drugstore, you can find aspirin that costs nothing, and that is one of the best anti-inflammatories out there. If you have to take an anti-inflammatory, you do not need to be taking a statin. I will not accept any of my patients to remain on statins any longer than they need to. As soon as I get the weight down and as soon as I get their metabolic markers improved, they get off the statins. So the triglycerides are the fat that is created when excess sugar gets converted into fat. Those are the triglycerides, and those are the ones I worry about the most, as I've just described. That and the HDL, the high density cholesterol. This is a cholesterol that moves around the body, mopping up all the old cholesterol and taking it back to the liver to be recycled. So what you want in your blood test is a very high good cholesterol level and a very low triglyceride level. How do you achieve that? You achieve that with a very low processed food diet, a no processed food diet. So you're going back to basics. And if your numbers are very high and you want to bring them down dramatically, you can cut out all starches and sugars from your diet for a period of time, and that's what's going to work. Dietary interventions will work to normalize all your blood tests far, far more and far more safely and effectively than any single drug out there. Just dietary changes. How can you realize that you have cholesterol? Ken is asking. With a blood test. That's the only way to know if your cholesterol is high or low. But like I've said, if I only see the cholesterol from my patients because the lab will do it anyway. If I had my way, I would only test the triglycerides and the HDL and nothing else, because nothing else is important. I think I've answered most of your questions. What leads to a heart attack if it is not high cholesterol? Well, this is a $64,000 question. And what a brilliant question, Teresa. So what causes a heart attack is the injury that I described earlier. When they looked at the blood vessels of these people who had died from heart attacks, they noted these fatty streaks. I described this earlier. And therefore, they blamed fat and they blamed cholesterol. But what caused the injury in the first place? What is causing the injury that is resulting in cholesterol and other things coming to repair that injury? Because once you know what is causing the injury, then you know what's causing heart disease. And there are several things that are causing the injury. Number one, front and center, is the amount of sugar in our diet. And the sugar ends up causing a process called glycation, and it basically destroys the inner lining of those vessels, the cells of those vessels. The second thing is cigarette smoking. That causes injury. Environmental toxins like pollution, that causes injury. Infections cause injury. Inflammatory disorders like lupus cause injury, rheumatoid arthritis. Those are the things that cause injury. So those are the things that cause heart disease. The idea that the healthy natural fat in our diet somehow ends up blocking the arteries is not founded. It is not founded. So that's what causes heart disease, not cholesterol. So which one works efficiently? Cutting off carbs or cutting out oils? I think, is that what you mean, Achien? Well, you mean for weight loss? For weight loss, you need to be cutting down the carbs significantly, because like I've just told you, most of what you'll be eating is very highly processed. And if you're eating a carbohydrate that is not highly processed, let's say a sweet potato, then that is very, very high in fiber. And what that does is that it significantly reduces the insulin response. So yes, you can lose weight with that. Would I cut out natural fat? Absolutely not. That is where the deliciousness is. Okay, and I'll just leave you with this. One of the other reasons why you should never ever be cutting out natural fat from your diet is because of the fact that you need fat to absorb your fat-soluble vitamins. These are vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. In the absence of fat, you cannot absorb these vitamins. So this is why I find it crazy that they tell us to go on a low-fat diet, so we can't absorb these vitamins, and they also tell us to stop having full-fat milk and eggs, which contain vitamin D and E. So what chance do we have of getting these vitamins? You don't want us to eat them, and you're doing everything you can to avoid us from accessing natural sources of them. What I say to people is just abandon the food guidelines and think about the fact that there's no evidence behind them in the first place. And actually, natural foods and natural fats have never ever caused us harm. The highest sources of vitamin A are liver, vitamin D, fish like sardines, vitamin E, sunflower seeds, and vitamin K, broccoli. And broccoli is very high in lots of things. So it's really important to remember that you're also going to be eating that amount of fat because you want to absorb all these healthy vitamins. What causes low blood pressure? And is it true that a little extra salt in the diet helps? Low blood pressure is caused by a variety of things. Most of the time it's genetic and it runs in families. A very common cause is dehydration. Usually if it's low and you have no symptoms, I wouldn't worry about it. If it's low and you have symptoms, then absolutely adding extra salt in your diet is a thing that you should do. I will come and speak one day about the importance of salt, because salt is another thing we've been told to stop eating, yet the absence of salt is more dangerous than too much salt. And I'll describe that in a bit more detail next time. Does insulin have anything to do with low blood pressure? I'm not sure. You mean insulin, the injection, or the natural hormone? I'm not sure what you mean, but I do know that very high insulin levels are caused by our diet, eating far too much processed carbohydrates, and it's the high insulin levels that are the root cause of all the modern diseases that are afflicting us, from obesity to diabetes to heart disease to cancer. High insulin levels is the root cause. So, you want to do everything you can to keep your insulin levels low. So I'm 1 minute to 9 o'clock. It's been exactly an hour. I hope you found it helpful. Take home points: natural fat is safe. Industrial processed seed oils are not. Fat doesn't make you fat. Natural fat doesn't make you fat. Excessive sugar makes you fat. And the oils that excessive sugar is cooked in makes you fatter. So let's just go back to nature, go back to natural food products, go back to the things that your grandmother would eat. If she wouldn't recognize it, don't eat it. That is just a rule of thumb. And then enjoy a happier and healthier you. Thank you so much. And I'll answer some more questions as we go along. I'm going to send all the links as promised down below in the comment section in a minute or two. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.